Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the Capitol relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. Katniss Everdeen wakes up in a mansion. Silence. Snow outside. The empty streets of Victor's village. On the table, a single white rose. You can see her hand hover over it. Right? The girl on fire in a house that suddenly feels too cold. The Capitol's promise is that this is safety, reward, and ending. But then you cut to black. No tour, no wedding dress, no mockingjay. What if President Snow kills Katniss right here before she ever leaves District 12 as a victor? At face value, it sounds simple. She dies. The story ends. Credits roll. But here's the real question. What kind of Panem does Snow think he can build if he removes her early and cleanly? No Quarter Quell twist built around victors, no arena rebellion, no girl on fire becoming the symbol that teaches every district to hope again. Snow already knows she's a political problem the second those berries hit the arena floor. He literally tells her she's inspired defiance in the districts. So why not just erase the problem? You imagine the Capitol's version, a tragic accident in her new house, a freak illness, maybe a hunting mishap in the woods. The message is, the games are still sacred, the victors are still protected, until they aren't. But this is where we talk about the contradiction. Snow is terrified of Katniss as a symbol, yet killing a victor is dangerous too. Every district has children who watched her outsmart the arena. Every mentor, every escort, every peacekeeper knows victors are supposed to be untouchable. So why would he risk turning her into a martyr? The only reason is if he believes he can control the narrative completely. That part matters because Victor's village is designed for visibility. Her empty house on the hill becomes a permanent monument. Kids in District 12 can see the lights turned off, the curtains never moving. The Capitol can spin that emptiness as a cautionary tale. Even a victor can't escape the consequences of defiance. And you start to feel the ripple. What does this do to Peeta, who just survived the games by building a relationship the cameras fell in love with? How does Haymitch react when the pattern repeats? Another tribute he tried to save, quietly removed by Snow. There is a lot to uncover here in how grief gets weaponized, how District 12 is told to move on, how the broadcasts turn Katniss from rebel spark into sanitized tragedy. Meanwhile, far underground, District 13 is watching their potential mockingjay vanish. So who do they pivot to? Peeta? Finnick? Someone even darker. That's the real tension of this timeline. In a world where the girl on fire is snuffed out early, does the rebellion burn out? Or does it find someone far more ruthless to carry the flame? Why Katniss's early death would shake all of Panem. So here's where Katniss's death stops being a personal tragedy and turns into a structural problem for Panem. In the canon timeline, the berries don't just save two teenagers, they detonate the rules of the games. You get District 11 saluting Katniss after Rue, riots in District 8 almost immediately, and Snow visiting her in Victor's village because he already knows she's become a question mark the capital can't control. But in this version, he cuts that arc off at the root. No tour, no growing myth, just the girl on fire goes home, then quietly disappears. At face value, that looks efficient. Snow sees a spark, he stomps it out. But here's the real question. Why does he think Katniss is more dangerous than any other victor who's ever mouthed off on camera? Why is a teenage girl with a bow more threatening than an entire peacekeeper force or a fleet of hovercrafts? The reason is that Katniss breaks the core promise of the games. Not the promise to the tributes, that's always been a lie, but the promise to the districts that if you play along, if you send your children and watch, the rules are at least stable. One victor, one winner, one story the capital can package. Two victors from a starvation district tears that relationship apart. Suddenly, people in 8 and 11 aren't just grieving. They're testing boundaries in the streets because they've seen the rules bend once. This is where we talk about why killing her is actually risky. Normally, victory isn't freedom. It's phase 2 of the games. You're paraded on the victory tour, forced into a lifetime of political leverage, and, for some, prostitution in capital penthouses. The system counts on your ongoing visibility. You're a walking commercial for obedience. When Snow removes Katniss, he's not just silencing a mouth, he's interrupting a machine built to recycle victors into propaganda. So what does the capital do instead? Do they stage a tragic illness from arena injuries? Blame a rebel attack from some unnamed district? There is a lot to uncover here, because whatever story they choose has to calm District 12 while not inflaming 8 and 11, which are already on edge from Rue and from factory unrest. Zooming out, the stakes get worse. Without Katniss on the tour, there's no shared salute moment, no accidental symbol echoed across districts. Unrest doesn't vanish. Maybe 8 still riots, but 11 stays quieter. Maybe Finnick remains a whispered scandal instead of a televised confession. The capital can double down on fear, more whippings, more peacekeepers, or try to bury everything under new, shinier victors who smile on cue. And that part matters, because this timeline isn't just Katniss dies the end. It's Snow running an experiment. Can he win completely? No Mockingjay, no open war, just a slower, more suffocating control. The next section, we're going to cover what that experiment does to Peeta, Haymitch, and the remaining victors when the games keep going without the girl who broke them. Our angle: Snow's clean kill and the politics of erasure. So this is where we talk about our actual angle. Snow killing Katniss isn't just a darker ending to the first games. It's a political project, a clean edit, a test of whether the capital can delete a story while the whole country is still watching the broadcast. At face value, you could say, he removes a problem girl, the arena resets, the ratings go on. But here's the real question. What happens when a regime tries to murder not just a person, but a narrative that's already in motion? Because by the time the Mutts drag Cato away, Katniss isn't just a tribute from District 12. She's the Berry Girl, the rule breaker, the proof that a victor can force the capital to blink. So our core claim is this. If Snow has her executed on the train home, or arranges a quiet accident in the victor's village, he isn't just killing Katniss Everdeen. He's attempting to erase the symbol of defiance she represents and prove that the capital can rewrite history in real time. The announcement becomes, there was never a real challenge to the games, just a tragic, unstable girl who couldn't handle victory. That part matters because it turns her into a cautionary tale rather than a promise of hope. We're going to cover this as a political thought experiment, not a gore fantasy. The question isn't how Snow kills her, it's why and what next. How does he spin the broadcast footage? How does Peeta get re-scripted as the loyal, grieving victor who never quite mentions that final handful of nightlock? How does Haymitch, already punished for outsmarting the arena once, navigate a second reminder that the Capitol edits the ending, not the tributes? Zoom out, and the lens widens. Snow is one power center, but he's not the only one. District 13 is already alive, Coin is already watching the games, and Plutarch is already gauging which victors might be useful pieces. Without Katniss, each of them has to adapt. Coin can't build a mockingjay around a dead girl, so does she pivot to Peeta, to Finnick, to the idea of anonymous martyrs instead of a single face. Does Plutarch push for a more covert, fragmented rebellion because there is no unifying symbol to rally around? Here's the tension we're tracking. Snow wants total control, but every attempt to close a crack puts pressure somewhere else. Killing Katniss might delay the uprisings that canonically follow the dual victory, but does it also radicalize Peeta in a quieter, more dangerous way? Does it turn Haymitch from reluctant mentor into the man who starts whispering treason in Victor's kitchens across Panem? We're not just swapping in a new Mockingjay skin and calling it a day. We're asking how the type of rebellion changes when the original catalyst is removed. Does leadership become colder, more calculated under Coin? Does the end state of Panem shift from fragile democracy to something harsher because there was never a girl whose first instinct was to save a child, not seize a throne? There is a lot to uncover here. Peeta's potential radicalization, Coin's rebranding of the revolution, Plutarch's long game, and whether Panem ends up freer or simply trades one careful tyrant for another in a world where the girl on fire never gets to burn the script. Roadmap through a Katnissless rebellion. So to keep all of that from turning into pure chaos, we need a roadmap through this Katnissless rebellion. Because at face value, you can just say, Snow kills the girl on fire, problem solved. But here's the real question. Solved for who? And for how long? First, we're going to cover the immediate aftermath, the part Snow thinks he can script. How does he actually take her off the board? Is it a quiet poisoning on the train home? A staged infection from her arena wounds? Or a tragic hunting accident back in the woods of District 12? That part matters because each version creates a different story for the Capitol to sell: martyr, cautionary tale, or forgettable footnote. We'll walk through how Snow spins the berries into a one-time stunt, how the broadcasts get re-edited, and how fast he tries to erase the relationship between Katniss and the uprisings already flickering in the districts. Then we narrow the lens. This is where we talk about District 12 and Peeta specifically. What does it do to Peeta to survive the games, win the crown, and then lose the girl he publicly promised to love? Does he fold into the perfect grieving victor, or does Haymitch's brand of quiet, dangerous resentment start to look very familiar? We'll look at the village, the empty house that should have been Katniss's, the way the district's brief hope curdles into something uglier when the Capitol's official story doesn't quite line up with what they know about her. From there, we zoom back out to the mid-game. Without a living Mockingjay, how do the other districts read the situation? Do they see the dual victory followed by a suspicious death and decide rebellion is pointless? Or proof that the capital is scared into that symbol slot instead? Finnick, already half-owned by the capital but beloved across Panem. Johanna, whose open contempt suddenly looks less suicidal and more prophetic. Maybe even Peeta, if his grief turns political. There is a lot to uncover here about how District 13 reacts when their best potential poster girl is gone and they have to rewrite the entire propaganda strategy around damaged adults instead of a defiant teenager. After that, we hit the structural shockwave, the quarter-quell without Katniss. Does Snow still dare to pull victors back into the arena when his original problem girl is already dead? Or does he redesign the 75th Games into something colder and more preventative? We'll explore what that arena looks like if it's built to crush Finnick or Johanna or Peeta as rising threats, and how the districts interpret a quell that breaks the last promise of safety for every victor. And finally, we'll push all the way into long-term fate. Does Snow manage a slow, suffocating victory where the games go on and the hope quietly drains out? Or, without Katniss to unify anything, does a messier, bloodier rebellion still erupt, only this time under Coin or some other leader who doesn't flinch at civilian casualties? Throughout, we're not just asking who replaces Katniss, we're going to keep circling a harder question. Does removing her make Panem's future better, worse, or just differently broken? And what does that say about the kind of hope this world was ever capable of? Welcome to the arena of what-ifs. And if you're hearing all of this and thinking, wait, we're really going to delete Katniss from the board and still expect Panem to function, welcome to the channel. This is where we talk about what happens when you stress test Suzanne Collins's world until the seams start to show. Then ask whether the capital system can actually hold. Around here, we don't just recap the games. We pull apart the wiring. Why Victor's village exists, why Snow clings so hard to that thin promise of hope, why a single stunt with some berries can send shockwaves through 12 districts and an underground 13th. If you're new, we're going to cover everything from lore breakdowns, how Tesserae quietly reshaped class, to full political autopsies of Snow, Coin, and everyone who thinks they can run Panem better. So this scenario, Snow killing Katniss right after the 74th Games, it's not a one-off thought experiment. It plugs straight into work we've already done on his relationship with the victors, District 13's propaganda machine, and the way the capital uses architecture, media, and trauma to keep people in line. At face value, you're just changing one outcome in one arena. But there is a lot to uncover here once you realize how many systems were already watching the girl on fire and quietly adjusting their plans. If you're someone who enjoys dense, lore-accurate speculation, the kind where we pause on a single Snow line and ask, okay, but what's the enforcement mechanism behind that threat? You're in the right place. We'll keep coming back to questions like, without Katniss, does Coin still get her Mockingjay? Does Plutarch still flip? Does Finnick ever get a chance to weaponize his secrets? That part matters because it tells us whether this world was always heading toward rebellion or whether it really did hinge on one traumatized hunter from District 12. For those of you who've been here through our Victor's Village deep dives and our breakdown of the third quarter quell, you know the drill. No filler, no 20-minute detours about merchandise or fan theories that contradict the text. We keep the pacing fast and the focus tight. Cause, effect, and the political cost of every decision Snow makes. If something isn't grounded in the books or the films, we'll flag it and then push it anyway, just to see how far the system can bend before it breaks. So here's the real question as we move forward. If Snow removes Katniss early, is that the moment he finally secures the games forever, or the moment he accidentally builds a martyr district 13 can't wait to resurrect in propaganda? Hold that in your head. All right, let's step back into Victor's village right after the 74th games and watch Snow make the most dangerous decision of his career. Snow's choice. How do you kill a victor and get away with it? So we're back in Victor's village, right after the 74th games. The parade is over. The cameras have mostly gone home, and Katniss is alone in a mansion she never asked for. This is Snow's window. Before the victory tour, before she can step back onto a train and start building a relationship with the districts, she's contained. One road in and out. Peacekeepers on the perimeter. Direct capital surveillance in every room that matters. At face value, this is the reward stage. In reality, it's the safest moment to erase a problem victor and write the ending yourself. So what are Snow's options? Public execution is technically on the table. He could charge her with treason over the berries and make an example of her. But here's the real question. Does he really want footage of the girl on fire being dragged to a scaffold replaying in every district square? That's instant martyrdom, and he knows it. On the other extreme, you have the quiet disappearance. Katniss just vanishes. No body, no story, just rumors. That part matters because Panem already runs on rumor. District 12 would invent 100 versions of her death, and at least one of them would be true enough to be dangerous. Snow has lived through early games chaos. He's not repeating the era when fear was unpredictable. So he lands where the capital always lands, with troublesome victors, the tragic accident, or the sudden tragic illness. There is a lot to uncover here. We've already seen his pattern with Haymitch. He doesn't kill the victor, he kills everyone around them. He turns addiction into a leash. He turns Finnick into a commodity. He sends Johanna's loved ones to their deaths. Poisoned drinks at capital parties, off-screen overdoses, convenient peacekeeper mistakes are absolutely in his playbook. In Victor's village, that translates into very specific scenarios. A hunting trip where the fence is mysteriously live and a peacekeeper panics. A training session in the woods where a stray shot ricochets. A toast with capital wine sent as a congratulatory gift that hits her but not Peeta, because his glass is swapped at the last second. This is where we talk about control. Snow needs something that can be blamed on trauma, on district backwardness, or on Katniss herself. And then comes the spin. The Capitol rolls out a polished memorial special. Slow motion footage of the girl on fire, soft music, Caesar Flickerman with a tear in his eye, talking about how some flames burn too bright for this world. Official cause? Complications from arena injuries, or a tragic accident rooted in unsafe District 12 conditions. The message is clear. She was fragile, unstable, a product of a broken district that couldn't handle the honor she'd been given. We're going to cover later how that propaganda reshapes the hope versus fear balance in Panem, but the seed is planted here. Katniss stops being a promise and becomes a warning. Volunteer, win, and the games might still eat you. So if Snow writes that ending, who actually buys it? Does Peeta swallow the script on camera while Haymitch drinks himself into silence? Or Do the victors and a certain underground district watching every broadcast quietly start asking whether the capital just murdered its own golden girl? Peeta, Haymitch, and a district in mourning. So if Snow writes that ending, who actually buys it? In District 12, the answer hits before the official story even finishes airing. Peeta's still on the train when the news breaks. 1 minute, he's rehearsing how he's going to navigate this strange new relationship with Katniss in Victor's village. The next, a Capitol announcer is telling him his co-victor tragically succumbed to complications from her injuries. At face value, it sounds plausible. The games are brutal. People die. But here's the real question. Why does it feel wrong in his bones anyway? This is where we talk about Peeta's attachment. In canon, he's already all in on Katniss before the arena even starts. He knows her walk, her singing, the way she held that bread in the rain. So when the Capitol claims she just didn't make it after surviving mutts, fire, and the berry stunt, Peeta's grief isn't clean. It's sticky. It comes with this low-level nausea that something about the timing, the phrasing, the forced condolences on camera does not add up. Haymitch gets there faster. He's the one person in the district who has already watched Snow turn victory into a death sentence. Back then, when Haymitch used the force field to win his own games, the punishment came later. His loved ones executed, his life dismantled until the bottle was the only thing left. So when Katniss dies right after publicly embarrassing the regime, he doesn't see tragedy. He sees a pattern. There is a lot to uncover here, but the short version is, Haymitch recognizes a targeted political move the second he hears it. And District 12, they've buried tributes for decades. They know how to stand in the square, listen to the anthem, and go back to the mines. But losing a victor is different. Losing their first female victor, the girl on fire who brought them feasts, music, and the faint promise that maybe the games could be beaten. That part matters because it rewrites the relationship between victory and safety right in front of them. You can imagine the wake. The hob goes quiet. People leave bread or primroses at the Justice Building steps, then hurry away before peacekeepers notice. There's grief? Yes, but it's paired with this sharp, frightened silence. If the Capitol can take her after she wins, what does that say about any hope they had? So where does that leave Peeta? Snow's script has a role ready for him. The tragic widower victor, the boy who loved too much, now perfectly pliable for Capitol interviews, tearful talk shows, and cautionary tales about how dangerous the arena is. We're going to cover whether he actually plays along. Pattern interrupt. What if he doesn't become the next Mockingjay at all? Peeta's empathy and horror at violence mean he's not going to pick up a bow and start shooting peacekeepers. Instead, the fork in the road is quieter. Does he let the narrative calcify, repeating Snow's version until he believes it? Or does he sit in that discomfort and start telling slightly different stories? A hesitation in an interview, a memory of Katniss's defiance framed as confusion, but laced with admiration, a toast in a seam kitchen that suggests the Capitol wasn't ready for her. That's the slower, underground resistance. Not a girl in armor, but a boy with a microphone and a talent for making people feel. And if District 12 is listening, even through their fear, the next question is who else might be listening too? Because somewhere under the rubble of old broadcasts, District 13 is still watching. The districts without a Mockingjay, sparks with no symbol. Because somewhere under the rubble of old broadcasts, District 13 is still watching. But here's the real question. What happens in the districts that aren't watching a screen, but a coffin? Or worse, no coffin at all. In canon, you remember how fast the sparks show up. District 11's salute after Rue, the man shot for whistling, the textile workers in 8 tearing down peacekeepers after the berry stunt. Those moments don't come out of nowhere. They come from years of hunger, overwork, and the quiet understanding that the games are rigged against you. So even in this timeline, all of that pressure is still there. Same grief, same anger. The difference is that the girl who turned it into a story everyone could see never makes it home. So, how does the Capitol sell that? At face value, they can't admit they executed a victor for defiance without admitting the promise of the games is a lie. So we're going to cover the spin. You get glossy segments about the danger of the arena, somber Claudius Temple-Smith voiceovers about lingering injuries, a tragic complication on the train ride back, maybe a rare infection, maybe a heart that gave out from strain. Snow doesn't erase her entirely. That part matters because erasing a district's first victor in decades would raise even more questions. Instead, he embalms her in sentiment. The Girl on Fire becomes a cautionary tale about how brutal the games are and how merciful the Capitol was to allow 2 victors at all. But you can't control what people mutter in the dark. In 11, where everyone remembers Rue's flowers, how many workers really believe an 18-year-old just didn't make it after winning? In 8, where radios crackle and rumors travel through factory floors, how long before someone whispers that the Capitol finished what the Mutts started? This is where we talk about whispered martyrs. No Mockingjay pin on state TV, but scratched birds on bunk walls, a song hummed too softly to be heard by a peacekeeper. At the same time, there's a colder reaction. If victory ends in a quiet death on a train, what does that say to the outer districts? For some, it confirms that there is no escape, no relationship between sacrifice and safety. Why volunteer? Why hope? You don't get coordinated rebellion from that mindset. You get people who stop raising their heads at all. And that's the real danger for Panem. Leaderless rage. Without a visible Mockingjay, any early uprisings are more flash fire than strategy. A riot in 11 after a public whipping. A factory walkout in 8 when rations are cut. Snow can crush those brutally without the PR nightmare of attacking a beloved symbol. No girl on fire being beaten on camera, just isolated unrest, quickly edited and quietly buried. So if the districts can't rally around Katniss, who do they rally around instead? And what kind of rebellion grows in the shadows when no one is allowed to wear the pin? District 13's pivot, coin without a Katniss. District 13 is watching all of this in real time. In canon, they're already alive under the rubble, pirating Capitol feeds, cataloguing every tribute's face, every flicker of dissent. Katniss's salute in 11, the Nightlock berries, the way the districts chant her name, that's not a surprise to them. That's a data point, a potential asset being born on screen. So what happens when that asset dies on screen instead? At face value, Snow announcing Katniss's tragic accident right after the games looks like a clean win. The Girl on Fire is snuffed out before she ever becomes the Mockingjay. But here's the real question. What message does that send to the people who were already planning to use her? To a district that has survived by reading the Capitol's paranoia as carefully as you read a reaping slip. For 13, The broadcast is confirmation. Snow is scared enough to erase a brand new victor from District 12 just to prove that no one, not even a game's darling, is beyond punishment. There is a lot to uncover here because that part matters. It tells Coin and Plutarch exactly how dangerous it is to build a revolution around one uncontrolled symbol. Coin's response would not be grief. It would be recalculation. She's pragmatic, ruthless, and obsessed with image because she understands the relationship between a face on a screen and food in a district's mouth. If Katniss can be removed that quickly, why gamble everything on another single Mockingjay? You can almost see her turning to Plutarch and saying, "Fine, then we build a flock." This is where we talk about the new casting call for Rebellion. Coin starts scanning the existing victor pool the way Snow once did, but for the opposite reason. Finnick's charm and capital fan base, Johanna's open rage at the system, even Peeta, now recut as the heartbroken lover from the seam whose partner didn't survive her injuries. Each offers a different promise, a different kind of hope to a different district. Plutarch becomes crucial here. As a former head game maker, he knows exactly which victors the capital adores, which it secretly fears, and which it quietly punishes into silence. He understands why Finnick is paraded and prostituted, why Johanna is allowed to be abrasive as long as she stays profitable, why Haymitch was broken instead of martyred. He can tell Coin which faces will move ratings, which deaths would spark riots, and which appearances should be timed with shortages or blackouts. So, instead of one Mockingjay, 13 might engineer a rotating cast of symbols, a coordinated media campaign of accidental slips, loaded interviews, and synchronized district protests. It's smarter, it's safer, it's also colder. And without Katniss's stubborn personal morality constantly jamming sticks into the gears, you have to ask, does this version of the revolution run more efficiently, or does it just get to Coin's future faster, the one Katniss was supposed to stop? If the war is born in a control room instead of a girl's kitchen in 12, what kind of Panem walks out on the other side? Rewriting the 75th games, a quarter quell with no Katniss. So now we hit the pressure point of Snow's long game, the third quarter quell. If the war doesn't start in an arena girl's kitchen, what happens when the arena itself is supposed to be the spark? At face value, we know Canon Snow's intent. The 75th game's twist, reaping from existing victors, isn't random cruelty pulled from a time capsule. It's a scalpel. It lets him target Katniss specifically, and as bonus punishment, steal back the very symbols the districts had started to cling to. You watched him do it. He turns "you're safe forever" into "you were never safe at all." But here's the real question. If Katniss is already dead, executed quietly after the berries, or lost to a sudden illness on the train, does Snow still play that card? Does he really risk telling every district that victory is a temporary lease when his main problem has already been removed? There is a lot to uncover here, so we're going to cover two branches. Branch 1, Snow keeps the quell exactly as written. Why? Because Katniss was never his only problem. He still has Haymitch, the clever victor who once broke the arena's design and got his family murdered for it. He still has Johanna, who refuses to perform, and Finnick, whose charm hides the capital's ugliest secret: the prostitution and blackmail of victors. From Snow's perspective, the 75th becomes a perfect chance to cull the unstable ones before they turn their trauma into rebellion. In that arena, without Katniss as a rallying point, the relationships shift. There's no Mockingjay to orbit around, no obvious face of hope to protect. Alliances become more cynical, more transactional. Maybe Haymitch never trusts anyone. Maybe Johanna doesn't bother saving a stranger because there's no girl on fire reminding her of a kid sister she lost. And Peeta, if he's reaped as a young widowed victor from District 12, he's not the steady, self-sacrificing partner we know. He's grief in a suit. That part matters because grief can go two ways in the games. He might become terrifyingly self-sacrificial, throwing himself into any plan that promises meaning to Katniss's death. Or he becomes disturbingly compliant, parroting capital lines, volunteering for propaganda segments, hoping obedience will at least keep 12 from being bombed off the map. Pattern interrupt. What if the arena never becomes the birthplace of open rebellion at all? Instead of a covert jailbreak and a flaming skyhook to District 13, imagine the 75th as a slow, ritualistic slaughter. One by one, the most traumatized, least controllable victors vanish in a spectacle the Capitol dresses up as nostalgia. No clock arena conspiracy, no mass alliance, no plan to free them. Just the quiet, efficient removal of people who know too much. Branch 2. Snow blinks. With Katniss gone, he softens the Quell twist, maybe turning it into a second chances games for older tributes or a brutal child-only edition that doesn't touch victors at all. Why? Because he needs the promise of safety back. He needs districts to believe that if you win, the games end for you. Break that promise without a Katniss-level threat, and you destabilize the system for no strategic reason. In that version, the 75th isn't an uprising trigger. It's damage control. The Capitol spins Katniss's death as a tragic anomaly, then uses a gentler Quell to reassure everyone that the rules are back in place. So which path does Snow choose? And more importantly, which one actually keeps Panem under control longer? That's where we have to look at how District 13 reads the board and who they decide to turn into a symbol when the original Mockingjay never takes flight. Who becomes the new symbol? Peeta, Finnick, or someone worse? So if Katniss dies and District 13 is still watching the board, here's the real question. Who do they slide into that empty Mockingjay-shaped space? And what kind of Panem does that choice create? Because you don't just swap out a symbol, you swap out a moral compass. At face value, the contenders look obvious. You have Peeta, the boy with the bread, already framed as the devoted lover and accidental rebel storyteller. You have Finnick, the Capitol's golden victor with a fan club and a file cabinet of secrets. You have Johanna, all rage and splinters, who has already lost her family to Snow. And on the edge of the arena system, you have Gale, the district radical with no games fame, but a very clear idea of how he thinks the war should be fought. So who does 13 pick, and who survives long enough for them to pick? This is where we talk about Peeta. Snow already knows he's dangerous because his weapon isn't a bow, it's a narrative. He can stand on a stage and make you believe the Capitol is merciful or monstrous with just a few sentences. If he lives past Katniss's death, every interview, every bakery visit in District 12 becomes a quiet referendum on the games. Does he break down on camera? Does he forgive? Does he start telling stories about children who never come home? There is a lot to uncover here. If Peeta becomes the symbol, the rebellion probably centers civilian lives. Fewer mass bombings, more food drops. The promise isn't just Snow must fall, it's we don't become snow afterward. That part matters, because 13's natural instinct is control. Peeta's instinct is mercy. The tension between those instincts would shape every strategy meeting. Now shift to Finnick. He already has what Peeta doesn't. Access, direct lines to the capital's elite, a relationship with Snow's inner circle, and a fan base that spans districts and capital screens. But his entire adult life is state-sanctioned abuse. If you put him on the posters instead, do you get a charming, hopeful symbol, or a beautiful weapon pointed straight at the people who hurt him? A Finnick-led rebellion might be faster and far more personal. Expose the secrets, burn the mansions, make every sponsor pay. You win the war, but what kind of peace do you write when your symbol's primary motive is vengeance? Then there are the darker options. Johanna and Gale, both angry, both grieving, neither interested in playing nice with capital civilians who cheered through 24 deaths a year. A Johanna-fronted uprising would be raw and cathartic, but probably chaotic. A Gale-centered movement, without Katniss to tug him back from the edge, leans into total war. Strategic, yes, but ruthless about necessary losses. So when we ask who replaces Katniss, we're really asking, do you want a Panem built on empathy, exposure, or pure retribution? And in the next section, we're going to cover how District 13's own agenda quietly rigs that choice long before any new Mockingjay takes flight. Snow's short-term win versus long-term collapse. So if District 13 is quietly rigging the choice of who replaces Katniss, we have to zoom out and ask something bigger. Does Snow actually win anything by killing her early? Or does he just trade one crisis for another, slower one? At face value, Snow gets his dream ending. The girl on fire never becomes the Mockingjay. No propos, no three-finger salute sweeping through every district. No unified narrative of the games are wrong. On paper, that's a clean win. But here's the real question. What happens to his entire hope versus fear strategy when he pulls that trigger? In canon, Snow is very explicit. A little hope is useful, as long as it's controlled. The games promise that if you're chosen, if you're brilliant or brutal enough, you can become a victor and escape the worst of your district's suffering. Victor's Village, the parades, the interviews, all of that is the capital saying, see, the system might kill you, but it might save you too. Kill Katniss right after the berries, and he's ripping that balance apart. Suddenly, it's not step out of line and you might still win. It's step out of line and even winning won't save you. That part matters because once victors realize the crown doesn't protect them, fear stops being stabilizing and starts being corrosive. You still keep people in line, but you burn through any remaining belief that the regime has rules. So, what does the next decade look like? Weirdly quiet on the surface. No Katniss means no symbol strong enough to synchronize the districts. You probably get scattered food riots in 11, a short-lived strike in 4, a few peacekeeper ambushes in 7. Each one is crushed hard, then buried under propaganda about malfunctioning trains or tragic mine accidents. Without a Mockingjay, there is no common story, and without a story, you don't get a cascade. From Snow's perspective, that's a win. He buys 10 years where the games keep running, the reaping still happens, and the capital broadcasts carefully curated victors who never mention the dead girl from 12. We're going to cover how those victors are managed later, but the short version is more surveillance, more disappearances, more Haymitch-style punishments. But every accident, every suspicious overdose, every district where a whole family vanishes after a protest goes into an invisible ledger. There is a lot to uncover here, because when you remove hope and rely only on terror, you don't erase rebellion, you compress it. Any future symbol, another tribute stunt, a peacekeeper defector, even a martyr in District 2, hits a population that's been silently counting every injustice for years. This is where we talk about the contrast with canon. Katniss accelerates everything, but she also gives the rebellion a moral frame. Protect children, end the games, punish the capital without becoming it. Without her, the eventual uprising is slower, more fragmented, and probably nastier, less Mockingjay, and more everyone settling scores at once. So if Snow's perfect victory is just a slower road to collapse, the real nightmare becomes the endpoint. When the system finally breaks, who's waiting to pick up the pieces? And are they actually worse than the man who killed the girl on fire? Coin's Republic without Katniss's check. So who actually wins that power vacuum? If Snow's empire finally cracks without a Mockingjay, who steps in and says, "I can fix this"? In Panem canon, that answer is Alma Coin. And here's the real question. Without Katniss there to ruin her perfect ending, what kind of country does Coin actually build? At face value, Coin is the opposite of Snow. No roses, no blood on the breath theatrics. She's grey, efficient, the promise of order after chaos. But there is a lot to uncover here. This is the woman who can calmly propose a symbolic final Hunger Games using capital children. She studies Katniss as a tool, watches how the districts respond, and the second her Mockingjay starts thinking for herself, Coin is already planning how to get rid of her. That part matters because it tells you her real relationship to power. It's not about freedom, it's about control. With better branding. Now remove Katniss from the board, no Mockingjay, no public execution of Coin in front of the whole capital. Suddenly, Coin's biggest potential internal check just never exists. District 13 has been recording, monitoring, and planning for years. We're going to cover how that preparation pays off. With no rogue symbol to negotiate around, Coin can present herself as the sole architect of victory. She's the one who outsmarted Snow, the disciplined commander who saved the districts from total annihilation. So what does that victory look like on the ground? The arenas probably go. They're too tied to Snow and the old games to keep. But do the cameras go with them? District 13 already runs on strict schedules, armed guards in every hallway, and ration cards controlling every calorie. It's not hard to imagine that system scaling. Surveillance doesn't vanish, it just changes logos. The capital's spectacle is replaced by 13's austerity. You don't get whipped in the square for stealing thread anymore. You get quietly reassigned, re-educated, or disappear in the name of security. Here's the pattern interrupt. In this version, the rebellion might actually be more successful militarily. Fewer delays, no messy rescue missions for one traumatized victor, no hesitation about civilian casualties in the capital. Coin can bomb the city harder, negotiate less, consolidate faster. On paper, the war ends sooner, but morally, it's a downgrade. There's no Katniss to stand in the snow and say, "Wait, we're not doing another games." There's no public refusal that forces everyone to confront that the method has started to mirror the original crime. This is where we talk about why Katniss matters beyond being the girl on fire. In canon, She's the one person who keeps insisting the way you win is part of the victory. Without her, that question never makes it to the main stage. The story still gets a new president, a new anthem, a new map of districts. But the core game, fear, control, and punishment dressed up as protection, never really ends. And if the games never truly end, even when the arenas are gone, what does that say about Panem's future and about what a real revolution would actually have to destroy? So, was Snow right to fear her? Final verdict and your turn. So if the games never really end, even when the arenas are gone, here's the real question. In a world where Snow kills Katniss right after the first games, does he actually win? Or does he just buy himself a slower, uglier defeat? At face value, his plan works. He snuffs out the girl on fire before she becomes the Mockingjay. The Capitol spins it as a tragic illness, an accident on a hunt, a quiet disappearance in Victor's village. District 12 is stunned into silence. Peeta is broken and heavily managed on Capitol talk shows. Haymitch goes from bitter mentor to cautionary tale. For about a decade, the message is clear. No one embarrasses the Capitol and lives. That part matters because it gives Snow exactly what he wants in the short term. The districts still grumble, but without a living symbol of defiance, their anger stays local, fragmented, easier to isolate and punish. Whispers in 8 don't automatically resonate in 4 or 11. The relationship between victors and their districts gets colder. No girl with a braid standing on a train platform, waving and accidentally uniting people who will never meet. Meanwhile, underground, District 13 is taking notes. They were already watching Katniss as a potential asset. When she vanishes, they don't stop planning. They just stop waiting. This is where we talk about a different kind of rebellion. Coin and Plutarch build a movement that doesn't hinge on one impulsive teenager with a moral allergy to propaganda. They build it around strategy, logistics, and a symbol they can fully script. So does Katniss's death prevent rebellion? No, it reshapes it. Without her, the uprisings come later, after more food shortages, more peacekeeper crackdowns, maybe a second quarter quell designed to remind everyone that the Capitol still writes the rules. When the break finally happens, it's bloodier, more coordinated, and far more willing to accept a coin-style president who promises safety without ever having to answer to a Mockingjay saying this is too far. And that's the twist. In canon, Katniss isn't just the spark that starts the fire. She's the conscience standing in the middle of the blaze, trying messily, traumatically, to keep the new Panem from repeating the old one. She refuses Snow's roses, but she also refuses Coin's final games. There is a lot to uncover here about why a single victor with a bow changes the moral ceiling of an entire revolution. So was Snow right to fear her? Absolutely. Not because she made rebellion possible, but because she made a better ending imaginable. Now it's your turn. In this timeline, who becomes the dominant symbol? Peeta with his words, Finnick with his secrets, Johanna with her rage, Gale with his strategy, or someone we barely notice in the original story? Does Panem end up better, worse, or just differently broken without Katniss? Tell me your preferred alternate leader and how you think their Panem looks in 10 years. And if you want to keep pulling on these threads, we're going to cover what if Coin won and what if Haymitch never rebelled next. If you enjoy these deep dive Hunger Games timelines and want more, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss where the story goes from here.